sort this out. So I love YouTubes, and I've got to say the first thing I did is I went back to my old textbooks, and probably the average 7th grader has more knowledge about telomeres and DNA than it was in our books back then from college. The old guidance just didn't have much. So anyway, so I started doing the YouTubes and different things and started looking up all these doctors and what were being said. And we knew the regenerative properties with herbs, tonic herbs, things like that, and how the body can regenerate and rebuild. And so in the process of checking it out, you know, you hear about the herb astragalus and how it was one of the main ones that they found originally that would lengthen the telomeres. Now the telomeres, this is your DNA. So I only have a small sample here, and every cell in your body has a DNA strand to it, and which has your 23 chromosomes. And so we have 70 trillion cells, and everyone has to know what is it doing, okay? So on the end of these little red tips, and this is the important part, this is the beginning of, they call that a telomere, and that telomere shortens every time that cell actually duplicates itself. Now, when we're first conceived, they'll call it base layers, like the layers like in a tree or so, and you have 15,000 when you're first conceived, layers. By the time you're born, it's 10,000. By the time you're middle-aged, 7,000, 8,000. Over 65, usually below 5,000. Death is usually around 3,000. So, there was a gentleman, his name was Bill Andrews, and he worked for Sierra Labs in Reno, Nevada, and he was doing research on AIDS. And in the process of doing that, it was, why were the bodies aging so fast with that disease? And in the process, what he found was the telomeres were shortening at such a rapid rate, and then what happens is they get so short, they fray at the end. They call it a Hayflick effect. So in other words, like when you have a shoelace in a shoe, in the little plastic end called the aglet, when it's all in good shape, you can rethread it and you can lace it right up. But as it wears out, it keeps getting shorter. All of a sudden, now it's all frayed. You can't thread it through. So now you're done. It has to be thrown away. Well, that's basically what happens is at the end of this telomere, at the end of it starts fraying, RNA comes along, another, nucleic acid, a protein, and it starts down at the end here, and it's able to start on this DNA and duplicate itself to make the replica cell, see? But if the telomere is too short, it can't start. So that's when death starts. So what happens is the AIDS virus was shortening up the telomeres so fast that they were having problems. Now, is that the only thing that does that? No. Stress, aging, chemical exposures. So meditation helps they find lengthen it. Certain exercise protocols will lengthen it. Now, here's the problem. When we have the system itself, when we start aging, when we hit about 65, at that point, the average person has an endocrinologist, cardiologist, a regular doctor, orthopedist, all these different doctors you start having in your environment only because of aging. Now, what's the one thing in common with all your cells? DNA. Okay? And so if you can get your system to regenerate and bring itself back up again, the body will start regenerating. So now, Bill Andrews started looking at things to what would lengthen that telomere. Now we see the problem. So they went through over 200,000 items, testing, herbs, drugs, everything. They found 30 items that actually lengthen the telomere again. It helps the body secrete an enzyme called telomerase, and telomerase actually lengthens it again to give it more life. So, after doing that, they were pretty smart with what they did. They found their information and they sent it off to Harvard to be proven. And so, since they sent it to Harvard, of course it made the news. Fountain of Youth found, at Harvard. And what they did is they tested it on mice. And so they had mice that had 20-year-old equivalency to 85-year-old. And so they did their parameters for checking them. The 85-year-olds had 20% less muscle mass, actually more fat, 20% less brain, graying hair. They'd get lost in the maze. They'd go find the cheese, but they couldn't get out. So, they forgot where they were. So anyway, so they would give them an injection of the telomerase enzyme, and in 8 weeks, their hair grew back in normal color, their fat cells decreased in the body, along with muscle mass went up, 20% more brain capacity, and they could find the cheese and get their way out, and they were reproducing again. Okay? So that was just 8 weeks, equivalent to taking about 10 years or so for us to start noticing some of those changes too. So, needless to say, that research, 3 of his partners actually won the Nobel Prize for that technology. So the technology is here and is proven.